Welcome back to Mae Sot, Thailand. In this video series, I'm essentially telling the story of my experiences during Typhoon Yolanda back in 2013 in the Philippines. But I'm kind of framing that story within a series of comparisons between that disaster and the one we're all currently in now, the COVID-19 worldwide pandemic. On the surface, of course, they're quite different events, but from the point of view of a foreigner accidentally caught up in it while overseas, there are some similarities. And when I started thinking about that, I kept coming up with more and more, and that's kind of what I'm talking about in these videos. In part one of this video series, I talked about how I just happened to be in the city of Tacloban in the Philippines when the typhoon struck. I showed some video clips and some photographs that I took that illustrated just how powerful that typhoon was and the accompanying storm surge, like a tsunami wave that crashed over the city. Most of the events that I talk about took place either inside my hotel room or in the hotel courtyard. In this video, things start to happen fast, and my brain really struggled to keep up. At this time in my story, with me on my hands and knees mopping up the floor with a towel and basically dealing with a flood, the full typhoon hadn't even arrived yet. You know, it really was just a normal typhoon at that point, the kind that I'm used to. But while I was in the middle of all this, then, this Category 5 Super Typhoon Yolanda made its presence known. Yeah, I won't forget that moment anytime soon either, where the wind went from a howl to like having a freight train in your head. I mean, it was just like an explosion of sound, like just ripping into you. I actually went outside onto the balcony of my room because, again, my hotel was sheltered. It had its back to the full force of the typhoon. That's where my windows were. But I could walk along the balcony to the edge, and there was a wall there with an open street, and the full wind was blasting by that wall. So I could walk over there, and then just put my hand across the wall out into the wind, and you just get your fingers out there, and you think it's going to rip your fingers off. It was so powerful. It's like those wind tunnels you see where they jack up the wind to 300 miles an hour or whatever it is. I mean, you don't think of air as having any kind of a presence, it's so light and there's really nothing to it. But when it's moving at that speed, I just put my hand there and I thought it was going to rip my fingers right off my hand. It was that powerful. And then back in my room with the rain now coming through the window, there was nothing I could do. I just gave up. I mean, it was just, if I couldn't close that window, my room was going to be flooded from the rain coming in. I just gave up. I left the bucket and the towels all over the floor, all the stuff on my bed. I covered it as best I could with jackets and whatnot. But it was basically, okay, everything in my room is going to be soaking wet, and there's nothing I can do about that. And then this idea of disasters sneaking up on you and perhaps not being as prepared as you could have been. Some more elements started to appear. Dumb Doug here. It was such a comedy of errors. I mean, just simple things. At that time I wasn't shooting video, so I wasn't even thinking about video. But I was doing a lot of photography. It was very important to me. It's what I did every day almost. In Tacloban, I'd walk through the markets and take pictures, which also made my experience there kind of interesting because I had spent a lot of days just walking through those shanty towns that I talked about before, the ones along the ocean. These houses were actually built on stilts over the water. I'm sure anyone who's traveled in this part of the world has seen these communities, and some of them had built foundations made out of cement, kind of sunk down into the water, and you can go through these communities along these narrow pathways, you know, and they're just so fascinating to walk through. It's like you're walking through the living rooms of hundreds of people, or thousands of people, because their lives are kind of being lived outside, you know. So it was amazing to walk through all there, and I knew these areas quite well from all of my photography walks. And then I could return there later on, post-typhoon, and see the destruction there, and walk through it again, you know, and see how it looked now that it was destroyed. And that contrast was pretty incredible. Anyway, I was just saying that photography was pretty important to me. And despite that, and despite knowing a typhoon was coming, I hadn't bothered to charge up my camera batteries. You know, I think I had one battery that had some charge in it, and all the other ones were dead. It's just like, how dumb can you be, really? You've got electricity now, and there's a typhoon coming. Charge your batteries. You know, I'm going to put that on a t-shirt. You know, disaster coming, and I'll make a list of the things you should do, and probably most of them I didn't do. You know, charge your batteries if they're important to you. But I did grab my camera, and the clips that I showed earlier, there was one where I shot like 6 or 7 seconds of the typhoon through my bathroom window. And that's all I captured of, you know, the full force of the typhoon at that time. And now that I think back, I don't know why I didn't film more. But again, there was a reason why. I think I shot that little bit, and then something happened that distracted me, and I put my camera away, and I never went back to taking video during the height of the typhoon. The other clips of the flood in the hotel courtyard, that was actually quite a bit of time after the full force of the typhoon had already left Tacloban, and the water level had previously been much higher than that and had already dropped down, you know, quite a bit. So I never did get any video or even pictures of the time of the full force of the typhoon and the flood that hit my hotel. And considering the things that were important to me, you know, my camera was quite important to me, but even more important was my bicycle. And did I take my bicycle into my room that night to protect it from the coming typhoon? No, I didn't. I mean, I can kind of understand why I didn't. The way my hotel was built, there was a big overhang. So the hotel rooms were here, quite high, and then the bottom floor had kind of a big, almost like a car park underneath the hotel. And people would actually park vehicles there. And there was a cement post, and I had locked my bicycle to this post. So it was out of the rain. I mean, if a typhoon came, it would not be in direct rain. And I guess I thought the bicycle would be fine down there. You know? It's like, how old do I have to become smarter? I still feel like such a dummy most of the time. So that's number 2. If you're a cyclist, you know, charge your batteries and take your bike inside when a typhoon is coming. It's just like Typhoon 101, and I know that now. But anyway, once I gave up on protecting everything in my room, I thought, oh, my bicycle. And I go outside, and the flood was coming into the courtyard. So my hotel was inland a little bit, so it didn't get a 25-foot wall of water. I think a pretty solid wall of water hit the other side of the hotel. So the storm surge came in this direction and it hit the back of my hotel. So that's where the full force of it hit. And then the water spread around and came in from the other sides. So the water that I saw coming into the courtyard was more of a flood than a tsunami. And again, it gets back to this human inability to get moving. I think I've seen it called the bystander effect. You're not taking in the seriousness and the reality of a situation. So there's this massive flood of water coming in, and I'm standing up on this balcony of my hotel watching this flood come in, and I'm just sort of absorbing the scene. I mean, the typhoon was still going on, so this was like still the full force of the typhoon, Category 5 winds blasting over the top of the hotel above me. This was a crazy scene with debris flying through the air like projectiles. It was not something I was used to seeing. And I'm watching this flood of water come in, and I'm just sort of standing there watching it. And I'm thinking, oh, so the ground down there is going to get a little bit wet from this flood, right? And then, of course, the flood is coming in harder and harder, and you start to think, oh, man, the hotel is going to be flooded, and my bike is down there. Wise decision or not? I think I would say not wise. But at that moment, I decided to go rescue my bike. Too late to do it. I should have done it the night before. I should have done it way earlier when the typhoon first hit. I mean, I was out there mopping up my floor. I should have been bringing in my bicycle, but I didn't. So I go out there, and then I go down the stairs, and by that point, the water, how high was it? It was like mid-chest, something like that, and rising fast. And I'm heading out into the courtyard into this water, this filled with debris that I'm talking about, not nearly as bad as was near the coastline, but everything in the courtyard, anything that was not inside a room was up and floating around and bashing into each other. The cars that were in the courtyard, they were floating. That's another thing I'm sure people know about typhoons and tsunamis and floods. Cars float, they're floaty. You know, the videos from Japan, you can actually see streets with dozens of cars and trucks just floating down the street, you know, bashing into each other. And when the storm is over, of course, you've got cars sitting on top of houses. You've got 7 or 8 cars piled up in a giant Lego pile. And I saw a lot of that in Tacloban. So down in this courtyard on either side of my bicycle, I've got these cars and trucks lifted off their wheels, floating around and banging into each other. And I'm kind of like fending them off, reaching underwater with water up to my mid-chest, trying to find the padlock and then pulling it up above the water, you know, with that wind and the rain. And I'm trying to dial the combination, you know, to get my bike out of there. I managed to unlock it, and then I'm picking up the bike and I've got it on my shoulder. It's a pretty heavy bike, and I'm carrying it through this water that's rising above, you know, getting closer and closer to my neck, carry it to the stairs, and then the stairs are full of people from the first floor whose rooms have been flooded, and they're all crowding into the stairs trying to climb up to the second floor, you know, or the third floor where the other rooms were, and I'm carrying my bicycle in this crowd going up. And I can't remember the geography of this exactly. I'm trying to picture the way this hotel was designed, but it had a solid front facing the storm, but there was a section in the corner that was open. So there was an area there that I had to go through where the full force of this typhoon wind was coming through. The other area was kind of protected, but this open area wasn't. So I'm going through this open area carrying the bike, and the wind hits, and it's such a solid force, it just blasts you backwards. But more than that was the debris in the wind, the projectiles that I talk about, that I mentioned earlier, where all the houses around you with the galvanized tin roofing, for example, had just been ripped to shreds, and these sheets of galvanized tin were like flying through the air, and some of this junk, some of this debris was like whipping through the air past me. And I don't think I was ever in that great a danger, but it was not beyond the pale to have been hit in the side of the head with a big hunk of wood, or have a piece of, sharp metal fly through the air, and cut your throat or something. I mean, you're not supposed to be out there rescuing your bicycle. You should have done that earlier. But anyway, that's what I did, and I carried my bicycle up into my room. And I'll give just a quick bicycle tangent here to explain later on why I could not get out of Tacloban. Something about that salt water, like my bicycle was soaking in a full bath of salt water from the ocean, or my bike had just reached the point in its history, because it's quite an old bike, right now it's a good 22 years old. At that time it would have been 15 years old or something like that. It was kind of worn out. But whatever the reason, days later, my bicycle was sitting inside my hotel room. I was on my bed inside my mosquito net, and I hear this giant ping. And I was like, what the heck was that? And then I hear ping, another one, and I get up and I track the sound down to my bike, and nothing was on my bike. I wasn't riding it. I wasn't sitting on it. There was no weight on it. But I could just stand there looking at the wheels, and then all around my front and rear wheel, the spokes were just pinging, just breaking, just snapping in half. I could just sit there and watch them. Ping, 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 ping. So something about the salt water affecting the wheel rims and the spokes had weakened them, and maybe the rubber of the tires had tightened. Whatever was going on, a lot of tension had built up to the point that all of my spokes were just snapping like spaghetti. So anyway, I quickly got out a spoke tool, and I went around both wheels and just loosened all the spokes that I could get that spoke wheel on, just so that I could reduce the tension and save as many spokes as I could. But that was kind of the condition of my bike at the time. Plus all the salt water had gotten into the frame, into all of the mechanisms, the internal hubs, all of that stuff had been flooded with salt water and was just rusting, and the whole bike was falling apart, while I was sitting in my room. But anyway, that's a bicycle tangent story there. Continuing with the theme of being unprepared. So now I'm in this situation, I'm in my room, I've given up on protecting anything from the incoming storm through the window. My bike has been rescued, it is in my room, and I've fallen back into that bystander effect where you're just observing. And I went out onto the balcony that went around the inside of my hotel, the balcony just outside my room. And I'm watching what's happening. Other people that were staying in the hotel, all Filipinos, were also outside kind of congregating and chatting with each other, watching the storm and watching the flood inside the courtyard. I went for a little walk, and most of the doors were open, and I'd look into the room and I would see 20 people just huddled inside a room. And these were all the people from the lower floors who had come up the stairs because their rooms had been flooded and destroyed, and they escaped with their lives to the second floor, and now they were all taking shelter inside these other rooms with other people and up on the third floor. So I'm just standing there like some sort of a disaster tourist, taking it all in. Meanwhile, that flood is coming up fast, right? It never dawned on me that it was going to come into my room. How could it? You know what? Nothing like that has ever happened to me. It was not something I had any experience with. But suddenly I realized that water is going to breach my floor, and my room is going to be flooded and destroyed, and I'm going to have to evacuate to the 3rd floor. So all this time that I've just been sitting around watching, I should have been in my room packing all of my gear, getting it ready so that I can get out if I need to. It just never occurred to me that I had to do that. So now my heart is racing. I see this flood coming up fast. I'm back in my room. And over the years, I've learned something about myself, which I don't think any male wants to admit. We all want to be the cool hero, calm under pressure. You know, the heroes we see in movies who in the middle of an emergency with guns firing over the head, they can think clearly and come up with a plan. I'm not that guy. I'm the thinker. I'm the planner. I like to organize ahead of time. But in the middle of a tragedy where there's a time limit, where there's a clock ticking, I don't think straight. I really don't. I wish I did, but I don't. So, as I said, I totally ignored the danger that was coming right at me, and now I'm running into my room, and my heart is pounding, and I'm looking at all the stuff that I've flung all over my room because it was getting soaking wet, and now I'm trying to pack it into my bicycle's pannier bags so that I will be able to evacuate if necessary. So I have to think about what is the most valuable. I can't take everything. You know, I have to pick and choose what I can pack and what I can carry. And I could not think straight. You know, I had so much trouble sorting through my gear and remembering what I should bring and what I shouldn't, and how to pack it and where to put it and how to waterproof it. So dumb. You know, it's like, I'll add that to my t-shirt. You know, prepare to evacuate. That would be the next one. Don't just hunker down and enjoy whatever shelter you've got. Okay, take shelter, but know that you might have to get out of there. And in a weird way, that kind of applies to my situation here in Mesot. I have settled into this room like a tree's roots sinking into soft ground. You know, it's like in the time that I've been here, this is my new paradise. This is my home. I love it here. And every day I settle in more and more, and I'm not ready to move. You know, if local health officials or something suddenly knock on my door and said, new policy, everyone who is not a resident of Mesot, we're moving you to a quarantine center or something. Something could happen, right? I'm not prepared to go. It would probably take me 3 hours to pack up this room and organize everything again, because I've spread out. I've put down roots physically and mentally. I'm in this room, you know. I'm not mentally prepared for a sudden order to evacuate. But okay, this COVID-19 situation isn't over yet. It could happen, you know. I could suddenly, like in an hour, have to pack them and leave, or by tomorrow pack up and go to Bangkok. Anything could happen, and mentally I'm not ready for that. Physically I'm not ready for that. So prepare to evacuate. So in Tacloban, I was not prepared to evacuate. But I went back into my room, and I'm just like packing like an insane person, and I eventually packed everything that I had. So I'm thinking, okay, now I'm prepared, right? I finally caught up with the reality of my situation. No, I haven't. Luckily, by this point, when I went back out, the water had peaked. It had actually got to my level and was kind of just peeking over the edge, and then it stopped and began to go down. So in fact, my room was not flooded, and I am eternally grateful for that. I cannot tell you what a difference that made in my life going forward. But I went outside with all my gear packed, and now I was talking with some other people, other guests staying at the hotel, all Filipinos, as I said. And their conversation was about the hotel collapsing. They're old school. They've lived in the Philippines. This was their home. They've seen what happens to buildings in typhoons, even buildings that look solid from the outside. Depending on the quality of the cement, that kind of thing, buildings collapse. And they're talking about the whole hotel just falling down on top of us. And I'm listening to them and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, come on. No, like not that, how many layers of disaster do I have to prepare for? So within such a short period of time, my sense of the urgency of the situation, went from here to here to here. And there seemed to be no top level to the urgency of the situation I was in. It never even occurred to me that, well, this hotel might collapse completely with all this concrete coming down on top of my head. So maybe I shouldn't be sitting inside my room. Maybe I should be out on the balcony. I should be on the stairs, ready to dive into the water when the whole hotel comes crashing down. I don't know, should I be? So, being prepared for a disaster, whether you're talking about a physical disaster like Typhoon Yolanda, or this more systemic societal disaster like COVID-19, there's a lot that goes into preparing for it in advance, and then the adjustments you have to make even while you're inside of it, and the adjustments that happen to you personally, the changes that occur to you even when you're not aware of it. This has been a very long story, much longer than I expected, but I have so many memories of that time and so many stories I could tell. Now that I'm talking about it, I'm kind of going off topic, but I really want to tell the story of what happened at that time. I wrote everything down. I have this whole story that I wrote in my journal, but I've never talked about it on video or anything like that because, shooting video like this is kind of a new thing in my life. So even though I'm going on for a long time, there's another story to tell about those first important minutes and hours. I mentioned my disappointment in myself that I'm not quite as good in an emergency as a solid male should be, and it makes me think of movies. I'm a huge movie buff. I've seen so many movies, but you think of any character played by Bruce Willis or any of the big heroes from Hollywood when they're in an emergency situation, be it a flood or a fire or a volcano or an earthquake, whatever it is, and they do two things. They're able to see the situation and what they should do clearly, and they're able to see beyond themselves. And there's a couple of stories here that I thought about a lot later, and I wondered what the significance of these stories were and what they say about me, perhaps, or about these situations in general. There was one situation involving a dog. This hotel had a guard dog. I got to know it very, very well. His name was Rambo, I think. It's a big dog, like a huge brown dog with a big head. I have some pictures of him. He's a guard dog, but he's a very friendly, big creature, and he'd come rumbling up to me and stick his head into my camera lens. So I got these pictures of his huge head peering into my camera. So that was Rambo. And I guess I don't know exactly what happened. I asked a lot of questions, but I didn't get answers that made any sense to me. But I guess as the typhoon was approaching, the security guard or someone from the hotel put Rambo in the back of a van. There was a van parked in the car park underneath the roof, the overhanging roof. And I guess it's safer in there and dry, you know, protection from whatever rain and wind is going to come from the typhoon, you know. So they put Rambo in the back of the van, close the door, you'll be okay in there for the typhoon. But, of course, everything was flooded, you know, 10 feet of water flooded the whole courtyard. Rambo, poor Rambo, was trapped inside the van and he drowned. Unbeknownst to me, you know, and this van was directly underneath my room. So whenever I was up on the balcony, peering out into the courtyard, watching the flood come in, Rambo was below me, trapped inside that van in mortal danger, and I had no idea. And while I was watching the flood come in and looking at the typhoon, even though I saw Rambo, the guard dog, every single day, many times a day, I never thought about him. I mean, I never looked out in the courtyard and went, oh, where's Rambo? You know, is he okay? I never thought of Rambo until long after, when they opened the doors of the van and they pulled his body out. And I was so shocked. It's like, Rambo, like, what were you doing in the van? And when I went down to get my bicycle, you know, my bicycle was tied to this cement pillar with a car, and I think there was another car and then a van with Rambo inside. So I was, you know, very, very close to Rambo in the van while I was getting my bicycle, but I didn't know he was in there. You know, I had no idea. And I tried to find out from other people what happened. You know, okay, so you put Rambo in the van, like, why didn't you go get him when the flood hit? Like, did the security guard forget about him? Did the hotel owners forget about him? Like, was it just an accident? Like, what happened to poor Rambo? And it just made me think, too, I mean, Rambo wasn't my responsibility, and there's so much going on. But at the same time, you know, I don't know. Standing there looking out at the courtyard, why didn't I suddenly think, oh, Rambo, where's Rambo? But I never did. And if you're thinking about if this was a movie and I was Bruce Willis in this room, maybe Bruce Willis wouldn't be mopping up the floor and trying to keep his sleeping bag dry. You know, I don't know, maybe he would have been outside running down the balcony, banging on doors and checking to make sure that everybody else was all right. I don't know, like, does that only happen in movies, or do people actually do that? I didn't do it. And I guess, you know, my reasons for that, I think, are pretty obvious. I was in the middle of my own disaster. I was taking care of stuff, and it happened so fast, and all of my time was occupied with just what was within the 20 feet around me. You know, my world was kind of crazy. And then when I looked outside, you know, I did see all these other guests in the hotel, Filipinos, who were on the balconies and running up the stairs, and they're in the rooms, and everybody seemed to be taking care of themselves. So it didn't occur to me that I had any help to give anyway. Like, I'm in the same situation they're in, so what am I going to do, you know? And there's, I mean, a lot of people spoke English, but there's the language barrier. Plus, you know, this is their country. You know, they have their own, they know so many people. They're all together with their families and their friends, or big groups staying together, you know, so they've got people taking care of them. I was there completely alone, without any kind of support system, nobody to turn to. So to me, to go up to a family of 15 Filipinos and bang on their door and stick my big foreigner head in, it's like, are you guys okay? Can I help you? You know, why would I do that? I don't really have any help to give them, you know. And yet when I think of Bruce Willis in a movie, I feel like that's what he would do, because that's what heroes do in movies. They go out looking for whoever is in trouble, and usually whoever is in trouble is quite obvious, and they save them. There's always somebody trapped underneath a beam shouting for help. And of course, if I saw someone in the courtyard drowning, I would have dove in and saved them. You know, if they're trapped under a beam, I'm going to try to lift the beam. You know, I would do all those hero things if I saw it. But as I said, in movies, they take the heroics to the next level, I guess, or they make the heroics more obvious. And the other story, really quite a dramatic one, I didn't even hear this story until weeks later. I was chatting with some of the staff at this hotel, people who had been working there, and they told me their story, and my mind was blown, because there are all these guest rooms in the hotel facing in towards the courtyard, but I didn't even know these rooms existed. But on the other side of the hotel, there were some very small, simple rooms, and some of the hotel staff, if they needed a place to stay, if they didn't have a home to go to, they would be staying in those rooms. And I never saw those rooms. You kind of got to them down this narrow passageway, and then there's like another narrow passageway with this high cement wall separating, you know, I get with barbed wire on the top, I'm sure, and glass embedded in the cement, separating the hotel compound from the neighboring buildings. And those big cinder block wall was there, and then you had all these little rooms. And I guess the hotel staff, some of them were staying in one of these rooms, and when the first wall of water hit, it hit that cinder block wall first, and that whole wall collapsed against the doors of these rooms, and these doors opened outwards, so all the people in this room were suddenly trapped. They couldn't open the door and get out of the room, and then the water started flooding the room, and the water levels rising. So if you want to talk about pure Hollywood danger, you know, you don't get anything more clear than that. You're in this room, you can't get out, and the water is rising. Luckily for them, they got out, and it was hard to get the details, you know, again, kind of the language barrier. But as they explained the story, there was a window up towards the top, and as the water was rising, and they gathered furniture, everything they could, to build a pile, and the water lifted them up, and they could climb up to the top and then get out that window and escape from this room. Crazy. I mean, just absolutely crazy. And all the time that I was mopping my floor and packing my bags to evacuate and taking a little bit of video of the flooding courtyard, these people were fighting for their lives in this room, totally out of my sight, and I had no idea what was going on. You know, I mean, even if they were screaming for help, you know, in this roar of the typhoon wind, you're not going to hear them. And I didn't even know these rooms existed. So again, maybe Bruce Willis, through some sort of psychic power, would know that somebody's in trouble over there, and he would, as the water's rising, he would have made it back there and pulled away some of the bricks and opened the door and gotten them out. But in the real world, you know, they were fighting their battle, and I was fighting mine, and I had no idea this was going on with them. And there's a little bit of a parallel, a similarity between that and this COVID-19 situation. I mean, again, from the point of view of a foreigner is what I'm focusing on, being caught up overseas. I'm here in this room in the middle of this pandemic, but because I'm a foreigner, because I don't speak the local language, because I don't know people here, I don't have a clear sense of what's going on out there, you know, like I mentioned the other day that I saw some emergency vehicles here in Mesot that had like COVID-19 emergency task force written on them. And I saw those and I was kind of taken aback. It's like, oh, so there's some sort of a central emergency point, and like, what if I went there? Like, is it at the local hospital? if I go to the local hospital, is there a big emergency center with doctors and nurses and emergency equipment with hundreds of patients being cared? Like, is all that going on around me somewhere in Mesot? And if I were the hero of the story, I could go over there and say, can I help? You know, what can I do? But again, in the real world, I don't know. Like, I honestly don't know what's going on out there in Mesot. On a walk the other day, I did walk by the biggest, like the central hospital here in Mesot, and I saw nothing. You know, I didn't see any activity going on. There was nothing out of the ordinary. It was just a big building. I didn't see any people. So I thought, okay, so there's no emergency task force there, but, you know, it must be out there somewhere. So the role of the hero in a disaster. It's an interesting thing, for me anyway, to think about.
Awa mo nito kontak. Lope itong.
Hingin na rin siya dahil. Nulit ko nga na-excited.
Hello. Hello.
Ano naman ang akong singko? Alam, pag naman din ako, ito pinapag-ang.
Douglas. Hello. Hey. Hello.
What's your problem?
Hey, do you want to picture?
Hey.
Just give him a pose. Just give him a pose. Oh, okay. No, thanks. Thanks.
Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Hello, where are
Hello.
you from?
From Canada.
Canada?
Mhm.
Thank you. Hey, Douglas. Hey,
Hello.
Teacher. Hey, Douglas.
I'm taking video.
Douglas is the Douglas, sama niyo. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Where are you going? Mama, where are you going, Douglas? Where are you going?
Oh.
Where are you going? Hoy, wala dyan. Where are you going? Where are you going? Bye.
Bye-bye.
What's your first name? Sure. One more. One more. Lolo! Lolo!
Hello.
Hello. Kuya! Bye. Ano mata mo?
Hello.
Hey, Brandon.
Hello.
Good morning.
Good morning.